Posterity? Something like that. Something like that. It's been a long day. All right, so we're good. Hi, you animals. Today it's Whiskey Wednesday. They haven't even drunk yet. It's great. All right, so Whiskey Wednesday, and for today's Whiskey Wednesday, I have none other than Nick Taylor is here today. We have this was supposed to be, just before we get started, this was supposed to be 4 whiskeys. As you can see, we have a couple more than 4.
They multiplied.
Yeah, they multiply. It's a lot of like rabbits. And well, it's like when you have friends, that's what happens, because like we would like to do the whole lineup of all the whiskeys you've ever done at this point for Found North. And we can do that. And so here you go. We got the basically, I think we got everything to
1
date.
through 6. Yeah.
Yeah, everything to date.
Yeah.
And so Nick's going to be here. Nick's going to lead us through this tasting. So I guess I'll start off with the thing is like explain to everybody sort of the concept behind Found North.
Yeah. So with Found North, we basically we were really drawn to overaged cask strength rye, and we knew Canada had great old rye. But the thing that we felt was going to be slightly different for us was, rather than sort of treat Canadian distilleries like their MGP, and you go up, you see a lot of whiskey and you say, okay, this is my whiskey, slap a label on it, start selling it. We wanted to treat it as if it were actually Canadian whiskey, because it is Canadian whiskey, but then blend it for the American profile. And what I mean by treat it like it is Canadian whiskey, Canadian whiskey is designed to be blended. It's the fundamental difference between American whiskey and Canadian whiskey is Americans will mash the grains. They'll combine the grains during mashing, fermentation, distillation, and maturation, right? So when the whiskey comes out of the barrel, it's effectively done if they want it to be. Canadians do single streams. So essentially they do corn whiskeys, rye whiskeys, barley, wheat. They ferment, distill, age them separately, and then they bottle them. I mean, they blend them at the end.
So it's more the art of the blend rather than the art of the mash.
Yeah. So for us, when we were seeing these really interesting whiskeys coming into the U.S., there were 2 issues. They were either made by Americans, in which case it's usually, hey, we picked this one stream and this is what we're doing, or it's Canadians and they're blending it, but then they're watering it down, they're chill filtering it, and they're adding caramel coloring, and it's basically like all the
but
things.
It's what they know. It's sort of what's done, right?
And I was having a conversation the other day about this, and the thing I pointed out was a lot of these super premium whiskeys that distilleries are releasing, they're there not because they make a lot of money off of those whiskeys. It's because it drives volume for their other stuff. So, the antique collection, it's not very much whiskey. The small batch limited edition, it's not very much whiskey, but it makes you buy more Buffalo Trace and it makes you buy more Four Roses. Canadians crush on volume. They did 20 million 9-liter cases in the US last year. They don't need these sort of premium, the higher proof, the kind of bigger, bolder flavor whiskeys to get into shelves and get into people's hands, because they're already crushing it with Canadian Club. They're already crushing it with Crown. And so they just don't worry about it. And to your point, it's not really their style. And so for us, we saw this really cool opportunity to really make Canadian whiskey with Canadian techniques in terms of blending, but make it for a profile that's more conducive to the not the American as in American citizen, but American as in drinkers of American whiskey, their profile, their palate.
So sort of the I don't want to say connoisseurs, but the people who are familiar with whiskey, that sort of live, breathe, fanatics, let's say, and say fanatics. So let's say fanatics instead of because it's probably more it's probably more accurate to say fanatics than it is anything else than to up them to advocates or enthusiasts. They're fanatics about it. And so now you're making the whiskey directly towards them, but you're using the Canadian sort of methodology.
Yes.
To blend those whiskeys.
Nailed it. And for us, the fun part about that is when you're buying from when you're just buying from contract distillers, or if you're just acting as an NDP of American whiskey, for the most part, it's you don't have much control outside of I like this style, I'm going to buy this. The opportunity when we go to Canada and we can look at all the different components is, one, the whiskey's really old, right? So it's like, batch 3, which everybody's about to try. It's a 5 whiskey blend. The whiskeys in there range from 17 to 25 years old, which is delightful. 2, it's not nearly as expensive, right? I mean, you couldn't possibly buy things as a producer. You can possibly buy these components in the United States without having to turn around and charge the consumer thousands of dollars a bottle.
Right.
But 3, and probably most importantly, is we have so much control over how it's going to taste, right? Like we actually get to influence to the point of exact precision of this is what we want it to taste like, which is unbelievably fun.
Now, let me ask you a question, especially if you're dealing with some older whiskeys. The difference being when you're dealing with some older whiskeys from our friendly neighbors to the north, Canada, as I like to say, the older whiskeys don't sort of follow the pattern as American whiskeys. And when I say that, pretty much everything, from Indiana and Kentucky, in those areas, is that when it starts getting old, because of the temperature variations and the high heat, they tend to get what I like to call one notes. It's wood spice and nothing else. And there's no depth of character. It becomes one monotonous note. And if you like wood spice, okay, that's great.
Yep.
But if that's not a determining factor, when you start getting into older whiskeys, that can be a turnoff for a lot of people. You don't seem to have that same problem with Canadian whiskeys. Yep. Is that because of the barrels, the environment? Why is that?
Both. It's you'd be surprised the environment you're looking at over the course of a year, maybe a 10-degree average difference, which is significant, but it's not the main factor. The main factor is they don't put everything in new wood, certainly not for its whole life. We do work with components that are, we'd call them over oaked, but it's not a problem if they're going to make up 10% of the blend.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You can
away.
That's the art of the blend,
exactly.
Right? That use that to get a note, but it doesn't become the whole symphony.
Yeah, and I think the really interesting thing that we've learned over the process of hopefully getting better as blenders, but over this time, we've started to learn that the most interesting components don't necessarily make for the best whiskey to blend with. And so when we were first doing this, we were constantly looking for whiskeys that were kind of almost done already. They had really the complexity and they had the things we wanted. But when we start blending them together, they'd get a little muddled. And what we've actually found is whiskeys that have really, really interesting directionality, whether they're over oaked or whether it's been in used oak for so long that it's developed this really fascinating florality. You can actually build around that really effectively when you're working with whiskeys that are, almost essentially complete, and you start trying to jam them together. It really just, it's like when you're painting and you start painting with too many colors and it starts getting kind of brown.
We always talk about that. It's like when you blend, you're taking pieces and fitting them together. Yeah. If they're both, it very rarely happens that you have two good whiskeys and you put them together to make something better.
No,
there always has to be something that they may be missing that the other one's going to fill in.
Each other.
They have to complement each other. So that's before they get a little too ornery, and I can see it in their eyes.
Yeah, it's time to drink.
I can see their fidgets.
So
let's start with, and we're going to do these in a sort of we're doing these in an order that makes sense for your palate, not in the order that they came out.
Yeah. So we can see.
So it's like we're gonna pop around here a little bit.
We're gonna bounce around a little.
So the first whiskey, and if you have your tray pointing with the arrow pointing towards you, the number 1 slot should be on the left-hand side, bottom left. It'll say number 1, but I'm just sort of making sure everybody's got them right. That is actually going to be batch number 3.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yeah, and it's stylistically it's the lightest whiskey we made. And I think it's perhaps probably the most dynamic whiskey we've made. It is the only whiskey that we've made that doesn't use any new American oak. There's a little bit of new Hungarian oak in there, but it's a 5 whiskey blend, and the ryes that we used were aged in ex Speyside, ex Tequila, ex Rechar rye, Rechar barrels, and the result is, and it's something that you pretty much never see in rye, because rye that gets this old, that's in new wood, is going to be completely bombarded by the oak. Rye actually starts presenting a lot of really interesting fruit and florality if you just let it get old enough. Nobody's been making rye except for the Canadians for the last 30, 40 years.
Well, you got to remember, American rye too was always being meant to be drunk at like 4 to 6 years old if you're lucky.
Exactly. And so you kind of have had most old ryes that we've had are often getting kind of drowned out. And this thing, we had these really interesting rye components, and they were so fruit forward. And we were just seeing these like cantaloupe and like melon fruits and orchard fruits. And we really just tried to sort of gently assemble the corn components around it to give it texture and give it backbone. But this was one of the hardest whiskeys to blend, because as soon as, and I say this all the time, if you have for us, we found if we have something that's a spicy component, and we have something that's a fruity component, if you want to blend them together, you need your fruit to be at about a ratio of 6-to-1 to maintain balance.
In other words, a little goes a long way.
You need so much fruit to
offset
any spice from particularly with rye. And so we had to find all of these rye components that were not aged in very oak forward barrels, so that we could maintain it. And then we had to actually find corn components that weren't throwing this big kind of fatty, heavy wood spice, and caramel. And so the result for us is like you get this sort of honey sweet, really delicate, really interesting old rye. And I'm absolutely obsessed with it, but you have to drink it first, because you won't, as soon as we go into these other 5 whiskeys, it'll.
So how many different whiskeys make up batch 3 types? Pretty much types of whiskey.
Batch 3 was a 17-year rye, 2 18-year ryes, a 21-year-old corn, and a 25-year-old corn. I can't even remember the exact percentage. It was funny because I used to know these and now I've gotten to 6 whiskeys. And
that's what happens when you drink a lot of Canadian whiskey.
Exactly.
So it basically comes down to, so when you started putting all these together, it basically comes down to the component, 64% rye, 32% corn, and 4% barley. Maturation is, we get American oak, because that's what you put in.
That Rechar. Yeah. For us, when we started blending, we were idiots, and we threw paint at the wall and we were like, oh, let's try this. And then the next day we try this. And the thing is, when you're when you're blending, you get drunk. And on top of it,
your point is,
and your palate goes
a little sideways
pretty quickly. And we'd be on our 20th sample of the day, and we'd be like, we've got it. And you'd taste it in the morning and be like,
we don't got it.
Yeah, what were we thinking? And it took us a long time to start figuring out our process, which was really to go back and find one of the components that we really loved, and then try to sort of, I always think of kind of cutting and polishing a gem, right? We're just trying to shape the rest around it. And so when we did the first label, we put all the maturations on there. It was the dumbest looking label you've ever seen.
It just went all over the board.
A list of just, like, okay, guys, it looks like a cake recipe, And so we were like, okay, we're not going to do that. So for maturation, we always label not the barrel type that was the most dominant, but the one that we assembled the whiskey around, that we were trying to highlight, trying to feature. So in this case, it was the American oak. It was the Rechar rye. And the corn component we used was actually Rechar as well. So we had really interesting kind of bright fruit notes from those.
55.1 ABV, everybody. So what do you guys think? Like that one? You don't like that one? No? Yes, no, maybe. Listen, that's why there's 6 of them up here. You'll like one of them. But I actually like this one. I think it's actually I think it's actually pretty cool. I get a little bit of just a hint of like a cedar.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
On this too. That plays around it's sort of the grounding component to like a lot of fruit flavors that I'm picking up in it. And that sort of brings it back down. Yeah. I like it though.
It has good body.
Yeah.
And it has good you have no idea it's a rye when you first nose it. You really don't find out it's a rye from a flavor standpoint until the very end of the palate. And you're like, oh, wow.
Nails the back of your tongue.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, hey, this actually has rye spice to it with a lot of it at strength.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that one. All right. So now we're going to go basically to like one of your newest batches.
Yes.
Which is batch 5.
Yes. Right? Batch 5. Yeah. So batch 5
is alive.
5 is alive. Batch 5, it's funny because we did batch 1 and 2 were 16 years. Batch 3 was 17 year. Batch 4 was 18 year. Batch 6 is a 17 year. And batch 5 is an 8 year. It's like, whoa, okay, one of these doesn't fit. And actually the reason was because we found maybe the most exciting component we've ever worked with, which was a wheat component that was aged exclusively in new oak, and it was 8 years old, and it was spectacular. Zach came and picked up a case from our my brother and co-founder picked up a case from our bunker, my basement, our bunker, today, and I was like, "What are you doing? Who are you? Where are you?" He's like, "Oh no, it's the only thing I drink now."
Bye.
Like, okay, you're drinking our profits away, but that's fine. But no, this was the first. We really have diverged from anything else we've done with batch 5. It is 27% that 8-year-old wheat, blended with 73% 21-year-old corn. So it's that awesome combination that we've seen with the early Rendezvous rye, which was kind of old with young. We think that blending style, as long as you go more with the old, is really superb.
Yeah, but this we get down to the point when we start talking a lot about non-age statement whiskeys, and again, you get to the point where you're going to have to put 8 on it.
Yep.
But the smallest component is an 8-year-old.
That's okay.
But now when you guys are trying this, obviously that 8-year-old has to be there. I mean, that's what's making this whiskey so good, is that 8-year-old is actually taming or changing the component of the older whiskey to make it good.
Yeah. And this, I mean, honestly, I will say this may be my favorite whiskey we've made. The 8-year, the thing about wheat, particularly wheat in new wood, is it's got the best mouthfeel. I'd say one of the weirdest things that we do from a production process standpoint is, if I've never met a blending house where they do all the blending at strength. Most blenders are bringing it down to 20% because they're doing most of the process with their nose, and it's all about matching flavors. And I get that, because particularly if you're going to bottle it at 40%, that makes sense because you're really going for a combination of flavors.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we do all our blending at strength because we are totally mouthfeel obsessed. Mouthfeel for me is the fundamental difference between whiskey and everything else. It is what makes whiskey so exciting.
Yeah, but that's what's also makes wheat is all about mouthfeel and barrel character.
It's
because
yes.
I mean, the barrel is going to come through the wheat. It's going to show that the I think a lot of the components of whatever barrel it's in, but it also is going to give you that texturally. It gives you a different feeling than almost everything else, especially if you're not going to chill filter.
It's creamy, it's velvety, it's minty, and when we combined it with the corn, the really old corn that was aged in ex-bourbon, then transferred for almost 9 years in new American oak as well, which made it really, they laid over the wheat, kind of laid on top of this lovely bed of corn, and the the way that the viscosity of the corn kind of took the creaminess of the wheat and just spread it all over the whole mouth. It was like the sides of the palate, the top, even this has mouthfeel on the roof of my palate, which is just a weird thing to say. It does have the kind of like, I always like cinnamon flavor because it tends to blend well with high proof. So you get that kind of like cinnamon sweet tingle right down the mid palate.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like cinnamon is just kind of dancing down your palate, down your gullet. It's like, yeah, this has every aspect of mouthfeel that I like. So we didn't care. We just said, you know what, this is just too good not to bottle, which has kind of been our practice in general. Is we'd much rather have the liquid be exactly how we want it to be, and let people taste it than try to get the kind of the stats right. Screw the stats. Let's get the liquid.
Moneyball.
Right.
We talk about that. Randall and I talk about that a lot. It's playing Moneyball. If you just want to do that, that's great. But usually your product's not going to come out well. And, the whiskey is the whiskey. The whiskey will tell you what it, if you do everything right, the whiskey will tell you, okay, this is what I was meant to be. I mean, this one's sort of funny because, you get the blend of 72 21 year and 27 8-year-old, right? Which is the exact, because they're both 100%. So it's 72% corn, 27% wheat, because both of them were 100. And that's so Canadian because, again, your components are just made of 1 grain.
Yep.
And that's what you're blending together. This is
the only 2 whiskey blend we've done.
58.1 ABV on this too.
Yep.
Just let everybody know that.
But
again, I think it's. What do you guys think of this one? Like this one? Yeah. But this is the one. Like, I hate to say this because, we talk about it in the industry about. Randall and I just had a discussion this last radio show about playing Moneyball, but everybody else does the same thing. So when you go to the shelf, you start looking, and unfortunately, you're going to look at these. You're going to be like 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 21-year-old, and then you see 8. You go, well, forget that one. And especially, you look at price points too, right? So you're sort of trying to gauge. Not everybody has the opportunity that you guys are having here tonight is to actually go through and try these, try before you buy sort of situations. Doesn't have that. So you're always constantly, as a consumer, also doing the same thing. You're sort of guessing. And this one, when you try something like this and you go, oh, wait, that was the 8-year-old. I'm not supposed to like that one. It sort of re-emphasizes the fact that if it's ready, it's ready. And if it's not, it's not. And don't worry, don't be an ageist. But, to what you guys do is being the transparency, and especially on this one, who wouldn't be transparent to tell you that you're using older whiskey, and the predominant measure of this is older whiskey. And we had to throw 8-year-old in there to make it come out right. And unfortunately, if we're going to put an age statement, that's what we have to put on there.
Yeah.
I almost wouldn't have gone with any age statement.
We thought about it, but honestly, I think the fun thing for us is there's a big enough Found North community now. And we felt good about that. There's a big enough Found North community now where I feel like
trust it.
Yeah. And I think people are going to go when one Found North drinker says, holy cow, have you tasted batch 5? The other Found North drinker goes, these guys, I mean, if you've been bought into a bunch of American guys making cast strength Canadian whiskey that isn't even properly categorizable, you're probably going to, like, if you've gone down that rabbit hole, you're going to take another step forward and say, okay, what they do here.
Absolutely. There's a reason for it. You can sit there and look at it. You're right. If you're sort of if you bought into what you guys are doing, you're saying, okay, there's a reason they did this.
And we like the idea that the people, look, we could only make 2,000 bottles of this, which sounds like a lot, but now we're in, markets all over the country. And so 2,000 bottles, we're almost out of our Massachusetts allocation. We're almost out of it around the country. And we only had 3 barrels of wheat. And so the idea that this is mostly making it into the hands of the people who've already been fans of Found North, there's something kind of, I don't know, very satisfying about
Yeah,
that.
definitely. What do you guys like the 8-year-old? Very good. So, all right, let's go on to number 3, which is going to be batch 4.
Batch 4. Yeah. You have my last case of batch 4. I brought it here today for you.
Well, you're the one that put it on the tasting list, so that's your fault.
I did. And I rated my own bunker for it, which was the other one that we have like no 2 left at home. Now we have no 4 left at home. We're soon going to have no 5.
That's okay. Your brother only drinks to 5 anyways.
No, yeah, 4 was really fun. 4 was the successor to batch 2. And it's 80% corn, 90% rye, 1% malted barley. And this style has really kind of become our signature, which is ironic because we thought we were going to be a rye company. But when we first released batch,
you actually became a Canadian whiskey company.
We did. Yeah, that's really.
I mean, what you did, because you start mixing. You start getting down to the 4. You're like 3 grain or 4 grain.
Yeah,
you're essentially a Canadian whiskey company.
Okay.
And most people they'll say Canadian rye, and it's not.
Yeah,
it's everything. Everything. It's actually a 4 grain. And they're saying, oh yeah, you want a Canadian rye, and it's not anymore.
No.
So you've actually bought into the Canada way.
We have. I know. Which is yeah, it's a little bit ironic. And really when we launched this thing, we made batch 1. We were making batch 2 because we just thought it looked stupid on the shelves to come out with just one product. I don't know. It just was like, no, you can't come out with just one bottle. It's just too dumb. And so we were making batch 2.
And Whistlepig says, of course you can.
Yeah. Not that they've been successful.
Yeah.
No. But the funny thing was, batch 2 was supposed to be a rye, and we were blending it. We blended it initially at about 80% rye, 20% corn, and then we brought it to 70-30. It was better. We brought it to 60-40. It was better. We brought it to 51-49, and it was better. And we were like, oh shit.
Maybe we should just go with the corn.
Yeah. And we had a meeting.
80%.
We had like all our copy, everything we'd written, all our marketing was all rye. It was just like all rye. And so finally we were just like, and that was when the kind of follow the whiskey motto that we have took over, because we were like,
you're trying to bend the whiskey to something it's not, rather than just going with it.
It was just like, this is so good at 80-20 corn to rye. We didn't even know what to call it. So we just call it cask strength whiskey. And TTB was like, so we were just like, okay, cask strength whiskey. And I guess idiotically, we were like, no one's going to buy this. We were like, everybody's bought into rye from Canada, but is anybody going to buy into this? And immediately accounts just started saying, hey, this is really, really good cask strength Canadian bourbon, which of course it's not, but there are 20 times as many bourbon drinkers as rye drinkers in this country. And so we sold out 2 so fast. And we were like, okay, we got to make batch 4's got to be corn again. And so we used the same concept, which we'll talk about too in a minute. We used the same concept, but we made what I feel like was a more dynamic whiskey. It was a 4 whiskey blend. There were 2 18-year ryes that made up 20% of the blend. And then there were 2 corns, a 21-year corn and a 25-year-old corn aged in Hungarian oak. And the Hungarian oak's a little tighter grained, but it has just as much wood sugar. It ends up throwing this incredible, like lava river of molasses, just molten molasses. And we were like, holy cow, this is so fun to build around. And so we built the entire whiskey around that component. And batch 4 ended up being one of our most popular whiskeys so far. I mean, geez, we've only had 6 whiskeys, so it's like our most popular whiskey. But batch 4
and 5 and 6 just came out.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, batch 4 won the John Barleycorn Best Canadian Whiskey this past spring, which was really fun because John Barleycorn's very like American palate focused. They really are into American whiskey. So
I think I like 2 better than 4 though.
Interesting. I don't know. I think 2's a little punchier, but I think 4's a little more dynamic, and I think 4 definitely is a slightly longer experience. Batch 2 is just
Every once in a while, you need a slap in the face. You know how that goes.
Yeah. Batch 2 is a nice slap in the face. Batch 4 is more like a slow punch in the gut.
What do you guys think of 2?
No, this is 4.
No, I'm on to 3. 3 is
batch 4. You've got batch 4 in your
you know
hand.
what? No, you mixed them back up again. Who did this?
Who did
this?
This
is supposed to be 4.
This is goodness gracious.
This is the one.
Yeah, so batch 4 is
that's why. Okay.
Batch 4 is 80% corn, 90% rye, 1% malted barley. Whiskeys range from 18 to 25 years. The ABV is 62.4%.
Okay. What do you guys think of this one? Batch 4. Like it? No, I don't think so at all. It drinks like it's 105. Exactly. 104.8. Okay. Do I have 104 too? Now I'm going to go to batch 2, which is the next one, which is number 4. Okay.
And we're drinking batch 2 after batch 4 because batch 2 is 64.9%.
Yeah.
And it's a little heavier. And honestly, stylistically, none of them are as heavy as batch 6, which we're drinking last. But
I will tell you, I've been holding on to this bottle of batch 2.
This is so funny.
So I've been holding it on, and every time I've seen you, I've neglected to tell you that I have it. And tonight was the night I said to Gio, I'm like, we still got that batch 2, right? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, he pulls it out, and I go, yeah, this is batch 2. The bottle that's set up here that's not open is batch 2, bottle 1.
We lost it.
And we lost it. I found it. It's been in my back room waiting for me to tell him that I have it. And every time I've seen him, I've forgotten to tell him that I have it. And I just put it aside.
Yeah. The funny thing about this is we didn't know how to calibrate the machine when we were bottling it. So you can see it's like the pour is up to like
neck pour.
This thing's all neck. This is a total necker. It's actually we figured it out. It's not a 750. It's a 790. There's
something stupid.
We did that for the first like 4 cases. So yeah, that's so funny because exactly.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. And we didn't know. We were like, where did we lose batch 2, bottle 1? Like, how did we manage to lose that?
And you're lucky. I just happened to notice it when we were going.
We assumed some customer one day would email us. And
say, I was stocking the shelf and saw it. And I said, well, we better put this aside. He's going to want this. Why would he? I was like, and that was the whole thing. Gio and I were talking about it. I'm like, why would he send this one out? And we're trying to figure out why he would send it out. And said, well, we'll just put this one aside.
Absolutely.
And we just said, now we've been out of 2. Right? We don't have 2. 2's
gone.
So you guys get to try it tonight. The only reason you get to try 2 tonight is because Rick was gracious enough to bring in a bottle that he had for you to try. Thank you, Rick. I mean, people forget that this is this, and we've seen this several times over the last couple months of Whiskey Wednesday. Is this is still essentially a club, and people bring stuff in that, especially when we're doing a tasting.
Yeah, really cool.
And we're very fortunate to have club members that think that, well, if I can drink it, everybody should. So thank you, Rick. Appreciate you for bringing that in for us.
Thank you, Rick. No, whiskey is best. Whiskey.
And the other bottle will be going back with him finally. So if you like 2, too bad.
If you like 2, too bad. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of liked this one from the get-go. So when we did it.
I love to.
So
my dad loves to. He's drank a lot of R2. Yeah, actually,
that's where the rest of 2 went.
Yeah, exactly. Hunt down Papa Scott.
Well, you add a little water to this. You're absolutely right, Megazone. Adding a little water to this, it dials it back a little bit, but it doesn't take away from the depth of the whiskey.
I think the crazy thing about this is this was built around a 20-year corn that had 13 years ex-bourbon, 7 years of new American oak. And the result is you get the full development of the vanilla caramel wood profile.
Yeah.
it doesn't. There's
no diminishing it.
Bitter.
Yeah, but there's no diminishing it either
at all.
Right.
It's that to me is, and it's funny because one of the hardest things for us has been finding Canadian components that have any new oak influence. We've hunted them down. They really don't like putting things in new oak.
No, they don't.
Kind of like the Scots, and so we've actually started recasting some of our components that we're buying because we want to start controlling the profile of what we're blending with even more, which is going to see.
Let me ask you something too. When you're getting these, when you're getting these whiskeys, one of the typical things that the racking system or the storage system in Canada is a lot different than it is here. Are they being on top of each other, palletized in concrete bunkers, basically?
No, it's not like
because I've seen different ways.
Seen some of that.
Yeah,
no,
I've seen different ways. But they are palletized on top.
Yeah, they're stacked on top, and we've seen tall, like pretty tall. I've been surprised that the height of some of the warehouses, it's like the newer warehouse at Old Pulteney, really quite tall. No, it's interesting because we own all of this whiskey, but it's in Canada. So it's hard to have as much control as you'd like over it. So we have a warehouse in New Hampshire now, and we've started sending stuff into New Hampshire, and then we're further maturing it in New Hampshire, which now is all kinds of, it's like we're making ourselves even less categorizable. It's like, okay, it's Canadian whiskey aged and American blended by Americans who aren't Canadian. It's getting a little confusing. But
how about it's whiskey?
Yeah,
it's whiskey.
It's whiskey.
Calm down. It's
Calm
whiskey.
down.
It's whiskey. Don't worry about it.
There is an incessant need in the whiskey community to label everything. It's like, oh man, when we came out with our single barrel program, where we made a blend and then recast it, and then we've been further maturing those barrels. When we called it a single barrel, there were so many purists who came after it. Well, that hasn't spent its entire life in a single barrel. Well, single barrel is, by the way, not a legal term. You get, like
small batch, single barrel.
Yeah, it's like no.
I mean, you can go right down the line as long as I picking a barrel. That is a single barrel.
That was our attitude, and on top of it, we're the only place where the practice of just living in one barrel for its whole life is actually a thing.
What did we talk about the one we did with Compass Box, the marrying cask, single marrying cask. So the whiskey was blended and then put in a finishing cask. So it was how it all got married together in this finishing cask. So we bought all of it. So that's a single barrel, but technically it's a single barrel, but the blend has been made and then put in a single barrel. So, I mean, define that. I define it as delicious because what came out of it,
a single ton.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Whiskey. And when we've done, there are ton whiskeys and there are marrying whiskeys and there are everything else under the sun. It all depends on when you get basically down to it. Is it good?
Is the whiskey good?
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, that's the deciding factor. Everybody goes, well, what's this? What's that? I don't know. Do you like it? Yeah, I really like it. Okay, then what are you trying to define something then for?
I do like that there's a delicate game at times where I think one of the questions that I get asked
as long as you're transparent about it.
Yeah, exactly. But I get asked all the time, like, how do you feel about the companies that are trying to make whiskey in 5 minutes instead of 15 years, where they're trying to essentially synthesize whiskey? And and one thing I've heard people say is like, wouldn't it be great if there was unlimited pappy, if you could just like whip it up? And I don't
know, but I like so many other things.
I know, but I regardless of what it is, I do have an issue with that because for me personally, when I got into whiskey, the one of the big draws was this is an industry that has forget the word tradition, but has people who believe in continuing to push this ship forward, to sort of push the entire category of whiskey forward. And I've always loved that when a master distiller somewhere takes over as master distiller, that person is usually finishing the product, the processes and the projects of his or her predecessor, and also knows that the things that they start will have to be completed by their successor. There's this really beautiful sort of handing off of the process, and it is a rare industry in the sense that like people believe in something enough to start it knowing that they're not going to be alive to finish it. You know what I mean? And I think that's a beautiful aspect of
that's
whiskey.
really a good way to look at it.
And so for me, like I get why people can feel a little rigid about it. But for us, I really feel like we are trying to actually honor Canadian whiskey and honor the process and honor the category. And that's one of the main reasons why we're so transparent about what we're doing. But we're also trying to sort of nudge it forward a little bit. I really feel like if aside from, yeah, I want Found North to be successful. I want to buy my house from, you know what I mean? Like I want there's a commercial
aspect. At the end of the day, it's about
this,
putting food on the table.
Sure. I want to put food on the table. But from a holistic standpoint, if we could move the Canadian whiskey industry and the Canadian whiskey process a little bit closer to the spearhead of whiskey drinkers who are really the most passionate about this, if we could just move them a little closer to each other, where Canadian whiskey distilleries and Canadian and producers of Canadian whiskey, ourselves included, are making things that are really attractive to the folks that are in this room, and the folks that we can grow, the folks that are interested and willing to take a shot at whiskeys like this. That to me is actually very important. And
that's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. And I'm going to tell you why it's a terrible idea, because the incessive nature of everybody that's really into whiskey will ruin it. Because once they find it, they want to covet it. And once they covet it, they want more of it. And then it becomes a problem of supply and demand. And we end up back to the same. It's circular. It's always circular. No one knows about it. It's really good. No one knows about it. It's really good. Everybody knows about it. It's really good. There's not enough of it. And it's like this whole sort of thing. So although I commend you,
we're good for 5 or 6 years. Don't worry.
I commend you. I've seen this story. I know where it ends. So I want you successful, not quite as successful.
You want it just to be a secret.
I want you to put food on the table, but you can't have a mansion. All right. So
you don't want me to starve.
Yeah, I don't want you to starve. I don't want you to starve.
For the sake of the whiskey.
For the sake of the whiskey.
I got it.
I'm very magnanimous that way.
All right, let's talk about batch one. Let's start
where it all started. So now we're at number 5 going into
5, which is batch one. Yeah, and I put it in the lineup here because I wanted to put it after.
We have a couple bottles of these left.
I know. I can't believe it. You told me you dug it up. You guys had
like 2 bottles,
2 or 3 bottles of this. This is another one that's long gone. Batch one was fun to make. It took 9 months for us to make batch one. It took us like 3 weeks to make the other ones.
That's because you were in your own heads.
God, we were in our own heads. It is a difficult process to be blending your own stuff every day to the point where you're really not drinking other whiskey. So you start losing your sense of reference. You're like, well, it's better than what I made yesterday, but does that mean it's a 6 or a 10? It's really tricky. We had to constantly blind taste each other and insert the whiskeys we were making into a bunch of things that were already on the market so that we could
all that meant is they got drunker.
Yeah, we got way drunker. That's why it took 9 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
The hangovers were half of that.
The craziest thing about batch one was we made this whiskey in the middle of COVID, and our blending team was never in the same room at the same time making these whiskeys, which was actually nuts because you'd have to instruct the person as to how you constructed the whiskey. And you had to communicate that as a drunk person to a drunk person. It was a nightmare. But in the end, there was batch one.
But in the end,
there was batch one. Batch one was actually built around a Hungarian oak aged rye, a 16-year Hungarian oak aged rye, and then a 17-year rye that was aged in Scotch cask, an ex-Speyside Scotch cask, and then a 20-year corn. And
How neutral was that Scotch cast though? Because you figure it's had to be second or third fill, right?
It was definitely second or third fill. It was um, quite the Hungarian oak aged rye was almost undrinkable on its own. The crazy thing about this whiskey was that we used about 6 times as much of the Speyside, and it was way more dominant a component, or 5 times as much. It was way more dominant a component than the Hungarian from a proportion of the blend standpoint. But the Hungarian oak rye is the centerpiece from a flavor standpoint, and that's that sort of balancing kind of creaminess and fruit flavors with spice. This thing was just this Hungarian oak aged rye was literally just spice in a bottle. It is, and when you drink it, it was just an assault of flavor, and then so much astringency, like so dry, like you took a all the spices in your spice cabinet and then just put a tablespoon in it. That was what it was like drinking it. And
I sort of like pumpkin spice.
Yeah, yeah, and it was, but we were able to sort of shape it, and I absolutely love this whiskey. I go back to this whiskey, and it's funny because I'm like my current mistress is batch 5. But I go back to this whiskey from time to time, and I'm like, why did I ever leave you? Because batch 1 is so fun. It is really a lovely whiskey. I'm delighted you have a couple bottles. I'll race whoever wants to get upstairs for them.
Let's go. What do you guys think of this one? So just so you know, it's 66% rye, 30% corn, 4% barley, Hungarian oak, like you said, 57.2 ABV, and that's about it.
Yeah,
good. What do you guys think? 16-year-old? Like it?
Yeah, the corn brightens up.
Don't like that one. Nope. That's why we have 6 up here, sir. Tasting scotch.
Scotch.
All right.
Yeah.
He's tasting scotch.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay. I think I think the rye really rises to the top on that one. The predominant flavor profile.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So now we went to the beginning. Now we shall go to the end.
We'll go right to the end.
This is the alpha and the alpha and the omega, right?
Yeah. Oh,
so
God,
the beginning
this
and the
thing
end.
is.
So this is Found North cast strength whiskey, aged 17 years. This one is going to be 87% corn, 12% rye, 1% barley, Hungarian oak, like a couple of the others. Yep. 64.1. This is almost 100. 100 over 128 proof.
Thing is, yeah, and I know batch 2 is a little bit. Higher in proof, but this is the heaviest whiskey we've made. And part of that is just that we increased the corn component up from a percentage standpoint up to about 87% from 80. And it just gives it so much weight. I mean, you talk
about
a
weighty whiskey.
It's a weighty whiskey. It's hefty.
This one has a little bit, I would say maybe like a mint or eucalyptus going on.
Oh, whoa. I totally, it's funny when, I always think when I always feel bad when I start saying tasting notes because people get their own impressions.
Right.
But I always love it actually when I am going in one direction and somebody brings me to the other part of the palate. Because when I nose this, I immediately get like buttered popcorn, and just like burnt brown sugar.
I think I get that on the palate.
It's totally right. There's like a really interesting floral note to this.
This one will put hair in your chest.
Yeah.
As my grandfather was fond of saying. There you go. That'll do you, boy.
To you, boy.
But this has there's a lot of different flavors going on. There's a lot of depth to this. If you add on this one, we were drinking this earlier. If you add a couple drops of water to this, it's not so much to bring the heat down, because even at this high proof, I don't think it's that hot. But it
blossoms.
It's the other flavor. You realize how you realize the depth of this whiskey by adding a little water to this one.
All the red fruit comes out
when
you add water. It's just the red fruit pops. Stone fruit. You get I get just like caramelized red apple. we bought some of them, and then we just kept buying them. Everything we
Hungarian
could
oak,
get that
the
had
Hungarian
oak.
oak cast.
We have bought so much Hungarian oak. We're obsessed.
Hungarian oak is sort of weird. It's sort of in between like French Limousine and American.
That's a really good way of putting it. It very much is like that.
It's not as closed as the French Limousine.
Nope. But it's
not as open.
Yep.
And the sugar component is sort of in between.
Yeah, it doesn't give you that cloyingly sweet. It gives you more brown sugar and molasses. And I think for us, one of the big questions we get all the time. And
did you guys put water on that?
Yeah.
Did you notice how sweet it became?
Yeah, it pops.
Yeah.
One of the, I mean, obviously we've really leaned into the fact that we make Canadian whiskey, but early on we got asked all the time, like, you're a bunch of American guys. Why don't you just go to MGP? Why aren't you making American whiskey? And for us, one of the big things was we love MGP. Like, I love MGP whiskey. I think they make incredible whiskey. The problem is that a lot of people make MGP whiskey. And for us, if this is really like, if this represents the flavor profile of what we drink in the US, I don't want to be smack dab in the middle of it. I kind of want to be right at the edges, pushing the edges out a little bit. I don't want to be over here. I don't want
to be the peripheral.
Yeah, I don't want to be something that tastes like. I remember somebody poured me a whiskey that won a bunch of awards a couple of years ago, and it was I think it was an Australian single malt. It tasted so far away from any other single malt I'd ever tasted. It was so hard. What do you think? Do you think this deserves to be the best? I was like, I don't know. It doesn't taste like, you know what I mean? It's like asking me if this chocolate bar is better than the eggs I had this morning. It's like, how can I compare these two things? They're not even in the same category. And so for us, categorically, we don't want to be way outside of the category, but we do want to be pushing the edges a little bit.
Okay.
And the Hungarian oak, it reminds you of bourbon. It reminds you of American style whiskey. It does have a lot of those attributes, but it's very much on the periphery. I don't think you'll find a bourbon. I don't think you'll find a Canadian whiskey, frankly, but I don't think you'll find a bourbon that really tastes like any of the whiskeys we make. I don't think you'll find an American rye that tastes like any of the whiskeys we make, but it is decidedly pleasing to that palate. And that's where we want to be. And that's why Hungarian oak is so fun.
Okay. What do you guys think? All right. Now, you can vote for more than one, but let's just go down the line. All right. See if I can see these up there. Batch 3. Yes, no, maybe. Yes. Batch 5. All right. I'm on that one. Batch 4. Batch 2. I like that one. Batch 1. Batch 6. All right.
Oh, pretty even across the board. That makes me really
happy. I think it's good because you got enough guesses on the stuff you just produced as you did on the stuff you started with. So that's always good, because if all of a sudden they start dropping off as we get to the later releases, you could be in trouble, my friend.
Yeah, no, I think we're making, it's hard to say, oh, we're making better whiskey, but I certainly think we've started making more dynamic whiskey. And that's at least there's a sense of like, it's hard to say, oh, I'm a better blender because I'm making definitively better whiskey. Everybody just raised their hand for 6 different whiskeys, right? But at least to be able to say, like, I feel like the complexity of the whiskeys we're making over the last 4 batches is slightly higher than the complexity of the first 2. Although one's a dynamic whiskey. One is a dynamic whiskey,
but it took you probably longer to get there, right? Yeah. Well, that's the difference, right? It's one of those type of things. You pay me for my knowledge base more than you pay me for my hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So you started getting to the point where it's like, okay, I can get there. It might still take me the amount of tries, but I can get there quicker. Quicker. Yeah. So, hey, I want to thank you for coming tonight and doing these great whiskeys with us. I'm going to go through the pricing and what we have in a second. I also have a couple surprises for everybody here tonight. So we're going to leave everybody else that didn't want to come tonight. I'll let you know, one of the things we are going to try is a brand new beer that we are doing with Fiddlehead. And it's barrel aged in some of the lock and key barrels. We're going to be trying that tonight. But you really should come to Whiskey Wednesdays. Hey, check us out wherever you get your apps on. It's the Liquor Talking. You can go to Julio's Liquors Facebook page and find the videos too. We hope you've enjoyed tonight, and have a good night, everybody. Stop the live stream. All right, now we're going to stop the recording because we don't want anybody else to hear what we're doing.